Thank you, Evan. And again, thank you to everyone who showed up today. I'm excited to have the panel that we have, a bit humbled, and I'll say embarrassed as well, too. I'm looking out at the crowd today at all the fantastic designers that we have from Method here today. And what will become very evident soon is I'm not a designer myself. So hopefully it won't be too evident, but we'll go ahead and get started just to give everyone a sense of the format for today. We are talking about designing for different purposes in financial services. We've got three great panelists who will introduce themselves here momentarily. We'll go through a series of questions and kind of snake our way through so that you get good perspective from each of them on their experience. And we'll leave some time at the end, most importantly. So if you have a question as we're going through, think that through, and we'll have a microphone available that we can pass along to you there. And we'll try to keep a mind out and an eye out for questions coming from online as well, too. So without further ado, less of me, more of the great guests that we have here. And so I'm going to start from my left and just ask everyone to give a brief introduction to themselves, what brought them into the career of design, and some of the stops that they've had along the way. So JJ, off to you.
All right. Hey, can you guys hear me okay? Perfect. So Joseph Johansson, aka JJ. I had a kind of a circuitous route into design. I actually thought as a kid that I wanted to be an electronic engineer, like a computer engineer. And I got it into about my junior year and realized I love the computer side, not built to be an engineer. So I shifted at the time to graphic design. There was no UX back then, and then made my way from there into UX. And I've been in financial services specifically since about 2008. So I've been in financial services for a while. So that's me.
Hi, I'm Kathy Emsoff, and let's see, how did I come into design? I always wanted to be an artist when I was a kid, and I quickly realized that I didn't really have the raw talent to be an artist, and I was more inspired by solving problems, and so design just made sense for me. Like JJ, I've been in the design industry for about 20 years, and I started my career in marketing, so advertising design at agencies, and then moved client side. And I've been in financial services since 2018 at Charles Schwab and FIS.
Hi, everybody. I'm Mike Adam. Starting out, I was like to draw and stuff when I was a kid, but never thought it was real. I was floundering through college and found a set of red books that told you like every career you could do, and found landscape architecture and graphic design. And graphic design was at that college, so I became a graphic designer. And actually got a master's in 3D animation, but found out that you never go home during that one. So found my way into UX. And been doing UX in financial services since about 2007, and mostly around here, but I'm currently working for Chase, so it's the first full-time work from home job and traveling a lot. So
wonderful. I mean, just an amazing representation of some of the leading institutions in the financial services realm. And I promise this will be the most financial service specific question of the day, and then we'll get to things that'll be interesting to anyone regardless of background. But JJ, start with you. What makes designing within financial services interesting or unique from your perspective and across your experience?
So there's a lot of answers to that, but the one that I find most interesting is really the breadth and the scale when you're designing for financial services. So across my career, I've designed for consumer spaces. I've designed for small business spaces. I've designed for wealth management, and each of those are different. And currently I'm designing for corporate, which is even more different. So from a uniqueness perspective, when you're designing for a consumer who is primarily using their mobile app to transact and do things in the moment, that is very, very different, like money movement or bill pay or things like that. Very, very different from how you would design for a CFO managing a workflow of the same kind of transaction for a large corporation. So that, to me, that keeps it always fresh. There's always new angles and new ways to approach it from a customer experience.
I love that. Lots of different needs to learn about and meet along the way through a lot of different unique mediums. What about you, Kathy? Anything that you would add to that from your perspective?
Yeah, building on what JJ said about all the different personas and use cases, I feel like in financial services, a single individual might be a different persona on any given day, depending on what they're interacting with. So, if they're interacting with their banking app and they just want to quickly check a balance or a transaction, that's very different than if they're, in their wealth portfolio and they're trying to look at their long-term strategies, or if they're doing, some options trading. And so I think it's important in financial services to really think about those behaviors and those use cases beyond, the individual person.
Mike?
It's interesting. I was, when thinking about this question, I was thinking about the more regulatory environment we have to deal with. It's the first time I've ever read law. And if I remember, I started in 2007. So in 2009, there was a credit card act, and it actually told you font sizes and whether things need to be bold and stuff. So it's like reading it and understanding how our partners were interpreting it was really an interesting activity for me to be having to deal with. The other one I always think about is all these products, until recently, all these products came up from like brick and mortar stores. So there's a reason why the word memo is still in our digital experiences and has nothing to do with digital. So it's just really interesting to think about some of the places we started and where we're at, and how long we've been doing it for.
Yeah, certainly regulatory is never a dimension you can ignore whenever you're talking financial services. And I'm always pleasantly surprised by the way it can be present, but not distracting at the same time, and available through unique design approaches and techniques. Back to our topic around different purposes, right? So Kathy, I'll start with you on this one. Let's dig into the different purposes of design and utilities of it within the industry, starting with designing for vision, designing for consensus building, designing even for funding. Within that realm, just talk to me a little bit about your experiences there, what you've seen be successful, or other things that you think are worthwhile calling out, and how design plays a role.
Yeah, sure. I think the first thing I'll say about vision from a designer's perspective, we always have to find a way to keep the gas pedal on vision. And it's really easy to get stuck in that build trap where you're always doing the next feature on the roadmap. There isn't any time carved out in the roadmap to do that vision work, but we have to find a way as designers. And I think you can scale that in different ways. And it's important to explain to your partners what the vision that you're doing is and what the purpose is. And so sometimes you might do really low fidelity vision work to share an idea or a concept, or sometimes kind of talking about the vision for funding, you might do something that appears to be high fidelity, but it's actually low depth. And it gives people, a reason to believe. It gives them a picture to put into their PowerPoint slide to ask for that funding. And, those are important. That's, a lot of times how projects do get funded. And so it's important, though, when you make those vision artifacts, that people understand what the purpose is, and they don't decide to just take that PowerPoint file and put it right into development.
I think we could stay in this one alone for a long time. Mike, what about from your perspective in those stages where you're just trying to think through where we might go from here, or how do we get the buy-in to do it? Anything that stands out across your career?
Well, a lot of what we deal with, we were talking about consensus, and a lot of what the challenges we have is sitting in a room and a lot of people have different opinions. And it's one of the places where picture is 1,000 words is very, very true. So you can, we'll have a roadmap conversation and talking about what we're going to do in Q1 and what we're going to release. And I'm trying to tell them they're missing a piece, but the fastest way to do is like, okay, so the end of Q1, you're going to have this, and there'll be no button at the bottom of the page. That's probably going to be a problem. Like, so often the visual is a great way to drive home the point that we actually have to make a change. And sometimes the fastest way to be heard. So
JJ, want to let you weigh in as well too.
Yeah, it's a really interesting topic, because when you think about vision, like, it's looking far out and helping people gain consensus about where you want to go. But the challenge with vision, if you go too far out, then like you might get excitement to go there, but like a lot of times the executives that you're pitching to, they know they're not going to be in the same seat 3 years from now or 4 years from now. And so you go too far out, even though it might be a really exciting idea, the buy-in goes down. So I like to think about like, how might we fail from a visioning perspective? And I think if you can't, like, if you're looking far out, which is what designers do, but you can't connect it back to today, you're going to fail, right? You've got to like incrementally figure out how to get there. So I think that's like when I think about vision, that's a key part. The other part is storytelling. Like you might have a really great, to Mike's point, a really great, visual or a prototype or something that shows it. But if you can't tell the story in a way that wins hearts and minds, you're not going to be successful.
Yeah, there's so much to unpack there around if you go high fidelity, how do you rein in expectations? How do you understand that it's going to be iterative to get there and make sure that it's not high expectations on first release, and then but still maintaining that momentum and building that consensus along the way. Maybe even just a step back. Kathy or I guess Mike, I'll start with you on this one. What about just designing for consistency as a whole? And how do you, as an organization or in the stops along the way, how do you establish, both the consistency of design, the experience that you want for an organization, and then ultimately some of the things that you want to achieve from just efficiency and on the development side? So maybe just talk a little bit about designing for the purposes of brand, of consistency, and other elements there.
Well, right now we use a design system, so it's obviously the easiest way to start the conversation. But we in the role I currently have, we have a lot of cross projects, like cross product projects. So imagine every product is its own silo. They think they're being consistent because they're using the design system. And then somebody shows up and says, that doesn't look like that one. So we've been trying to figure out a way to talk about it in a way that doesn't like make fun of their baby. But a lot of the ways we've been using the language is, if a user goes from your experience to your experience and has to make the same action, are they tripped up because your very cool and maybe better interaction is different than the one they did last time? So that's more of a fail than of inconsistency, because it slowed the user down. Maybe you did on purpose, but if you're trying to be fast and efficient, that would be a reason why you'd want to be consistent. So it's more of how you apply the design system in those situations more than anything else.
Yeah, design system, obviously a great topic. And I always find when I'm talking to various companies that there's a very wide range of understanding of what that may mean and the different, efficiencies or other gains that you get out of having consistent experience. JJ, anything that you would layer in this realm or add for folks to think about?
Yeah, two thoughts. So yeah, I've been with a number of large banks in the Charlotte area. I've been in the financial services industry for a while. I would say everyone that I've worked with or partnered with has had a different approach when it comes to design systems and consistency. The one thing that I try and really push for is kind of building on what Mike was saying, but in a little bit of a different direction, is avoiding the consistency trap, where like you want consistency across an experience, but if your like design system covers multiple product segments, for example, you want to be really careful in applying a design system to a consumer space and then turning around and applying that same design system, design language to a corporate space. The information density is different. The workflow is very different. And so sometimes when you've got a design system, it's established, it's much easier to just use what's existing and create the thing that you're trying to create, when really you may need to like go beyond it and push for something that's better and so it's a tension that I've seen. Some they break it out and they've got a design system that's for consumer and another one that's for this segment and another one for this segment. Some they pull them all together and they have one, but they have brand guidelines that they use to try and tease out those nuances. It's a huge challenge, but it's definitely one of the things that I spend a lot of time kind of thinking about and focusing on from a consistency perspective.
The old notion that rules are meant to be broken, right,
Yes,
JJ? And just got to figure out what the right bounds are there. Yeah.
Well, and using the design system, to your point earlier, you can compose it in a number of ways and end up with very different experiences, even adhering to a design system. And so, one thing that I've been looking into is how do we keep track of that at scale? Because it's beyond our ability as humans. We can't have that many meetings in a day. We can't put our eyes on all the work that's happening at any moment. So how can we, use tooling or other methods to, really bubble this up and make it easier for us to have, eyes on consistency or deliberately be inconsistent when it's appropriate.
I love that. Well, let's keep moving through the life cycle here, or at least, different variations of how design manifests itself, and talk about one of my favorites, which is designing to learn. JJ, I'll start with you this time and just talk, what does that mean to you, and what's the role of design and learning around what experiences should be?
So designing to learn is actually one of my favorites. Like, yes, we should deliver, and I know we'll talk about that, but really, if you don't understand the problem you're trying to solve and experiment on that problem to learn and make sure you're solving it in a good way, you're not going to be successful. And I'll give you an example. So early on, I was learning design thinking, right? And so I was at Stanford at the D School, and our mission was to redesign the online or the on-campus dining experience. And I, being an interaction designer by trade, I was like, oh, I'm going to create an app and I'm going to do all this stuff. And I had paper prototypes that I had taken pictures of and put on an iPad that people could like swipe through. And I was so proud of myself. And then we went out there to test it, and people just struggled. They got so fixated on my low fidelity buttons and what this does and what that does, that I wasn't validating that I understood the problem to be solved. And so went back and talked with the folks who were teaching me, and they're like, you know what, you need to like forget everything, pare it way back and focus on the problem. And so what I found was I had a blue rubber band. I put it on my wrist, and I went and did a role play with people talking about the dining experience and how you could use technology in, represented by this blue rubber band, to make it better. And it totally changed everything. And we got into the meat of the problem, and then we're able to get into the solution. So for me, designing to learn is all about that critical thinking and digging into the problem, not the bells and whistles of like the polished design that comes later.
Yeah, no, amazing. I had a designer say to me the other day that if you're not designing to solve a problem, you're not designing. And I love the statement itself, and that's at the heart of what you're talking about there. Kathy, expand from your perspective. I mean, designing to learn, what does that mean to you? What's the role of design? Anything in that room?
I think if you jump into design too early, you risk losing sight of the problem that you just described. And so for me, it's less about designing to learn and more about let's learn and maybe avoid the design for a while and figure out like what is the minimal thing that we need to learn before we jump into the design. And do we need a design artifact to do that learning? Or is there another way? Can we do, some surveys? Can we do a card sorting? Anything to try to separate what users' problems are and what their preferences are before we start confounding the research or the exploration with visual artifacts.
Just maybe a fast follow for you there, Kathy. I think what's often lost is then, does that mean not engaging the designer in the process? And so just maybe talk about, how do designers appropriately interact across the life cycle of the ideation process, and how to harness that ability where they're not being asked to design, but they're still participating in the learning process?
Well, they might actually be asked to design at that point, and their role might be to say, hey, let's pull in a user research and see if we can solve it in another way. But if they're not being pulled in and the research is beginning, I would love for them to be involved. I think it's a team effort, and the designer has a lot of perspective to bring, and they probably have a closet full of ideas that haven't seen the light of day. And so, I think those could be some good threads for trying to understand, where those problems might be.
Yeah, we talk about that a lot with clients, and having the engineers there at that stage as well too, so that they're part of the problem solving process, even though they're not coding at that stage, and having the value of that triad. Mike, anything you want to add from designing to learn and your learnings across your career in this realm?
Yeah, I kind of in the category both, and with what JJ and Kathy said, there's a lot that we need to learn, and I love to dissect and understand something. I'll use the Einstein quote: if you give me 5 minutes to answer a question, I'll take 4 minutes and 38 seconds to define the question, and then I'll spend the last few minutes answering it. So I'm a big fan of that. And at the same time, I think we all know we need to actually show stuff to people. People want to see it. So finding that balance is important in the learning stage. One of the things we've talked a lot about with my team is we're a bunch of smart designers. We've done a lot of great stuff. I don't know that we need a research input to design. I don't know if I go as far as Joe and his paper prototype. I didn't know you invented the Apple Watch, by the way. But it is good to say, it's like, well, before I have my first input, I do have thoughts. Let me put it on paper. As long as you're okay saying, I'm totally okay with crumbling that thing up and throwing it away when I get a new piece of information. So, and I think that's the way a lot of people learn. It's also a good way to process. If you get a new piece of data, rather than waiting for all data, maybe it's good to say, let me use my design skills to process the data I just got, which is how a lot of the ways that we've been thinking about doing it are.
Just one more thought, just to riff on this a little bit. Like, I think the question you asked previously in this one, there's a risk because we have such good design systems, and we can go to high fidelity very, very quickly and mock something up and get it out there. And I think sometimes there's a risk of bypassing this early problem solving in really deep inquiry and just going straight to high fidelity. It's easier to sell, right? You can put together something really polished, get it in front of people, but you risk like skipping over those important formative steps. And even with very senior designers on my team, it's a constant reminder of like, hey, go back, boxes and arrows, user flows, early design artifacts instead of jumping right into the design system to create something.
Yeah, no, I love that. Maybe just stay there 1 second longer since we introduced it. Low fidelity versus mid fidelity. Does that exist versus high fidelity? What are some of the pros and the cons in a learning stage? And how might you use different forms and different fidelities to answer different types of questions at different stages in a learning process?
So it's a really good question. When it comes to like early stages, I try and stay away from screens altogether. Like, let's do user flows, align on what is the experience going to be from just a steps in the process perspective. Then from there, I think I tend to not spend as much time on lower fidelity because we have design systems and things in place. And I think that, in years past, stakeholders weren't as educated in understanding, even though this is using the design system, it is still early in the design stage. So I don't have to fight that as much. So I'm more comfortable going from early, card sorts and user flows and things that don't deal with the screen straight into the more higher fidelity. I don't know what others think, but that's where I'm at.
I think I'd add zone diagrams in there, after user flows to start blocking out the content. But I think I've probably, tripped on this more than I've been successful. So many times of, well, let's, use a crazy marker font to demonstrate that the work is rough, or let's make it all light gray or light blue, or, and it's tough, trying to, demonstrate that. And so for me, that's why I think it's easier to kind of stay in the user flow zone diagram until you're really ready to put those pixels forward.
I'm going to ask it as a question. Is the problem of the fidelity when you leave? Because that's been my thing. It's like, I'd rather get to the answer fast, and I don't really care what the level of fidelity is. If I'm in the middle of a project and the flow already exists, I don't want to go all the way back to wireframes to show that there's a problem on screen 3. But I also don't want to show the new designer through screen 3, leave it around for a tech partner to come to me tomorrow and be like, I can't do that. I'm like, so that's the challenge that I face, is not that I'm afraid of doing a high fidelity or low fidelity. It's more, are you going to think this is done? And I think that's more the challenge. So how do you wrap your thing around something to make sure they know this is still an idea? So.
Well, and then if you have outsiders, so we were talking about design critique earlier, you need to show them that flow, because if you show them screen 3, it's hard to orient them. Even if they've been in financial services for a long time and they know the products. If it's not their product, it's going to be tough for them to catch up in that moment. So it is helpful.
Well, and it's a good way to align across disciplines too, right? If you're looking at it with product partners and technologists and designers, and you're looking at just the flow, you can align very quickly on, I see how technology comes in and says, before you've spent any time, pushing pixels, there's a problem here, or there's a problem here. Then you can, align very quickly on that and move forward.
And that can really, the opposite of that can be really time consuming and expensive. If you do, tons and tons of mock-ups to realize that, the back end can't handle it, you've lost a little bit of time there.
And I think just to tease out a couple of themes I think I heard there's the maturity of a product. So if something exists is the scenario I think Mike was going into, then you want to make sure you're starting from a place of understanding and, and whatnot. I think that there was an element of focus as well too, that we hit on, slightly in terms of, are you wanting to show a full high fidelity experience, or are you trying to get a very specific answer and it's only necessary to show a component of that to get that? Or, how much distraction do you get by showing more, which is always part of the learning process. And then I think the last thing I think I heard as well too was context, right? You need a user to be in the mindset as they're flowing through an experience that they're going to be in reality if you're going to get real feedback and insights from how they're interacting.
Yeah, or a stakeholder or a design, from whoever you're interacting with, making sure they have the right context.
How I interact with one screen is going to be very different than how I come into an experience and how I feel when I get to screen 7, right? And so some really great considerations to kind of tease out there. So let's jump into designing for delivery then. And, I think in this one, I would love to hear, especially from each of you, how a design team or, part of an organization that you've been has been really highly functioning and successful at, the design process when they've been incorporated it in the right ways, and maybe also some experiences that you've had along the way that have been less successful, where design teams maybe haven't been utilized, and what the context of some of those situations were and how they might be avoided. So I guess, Mike, I'll start with you on this one, if you don't mind.
Okay. Well, right now, actually, I have both scenarios at the same time. So the team is a really good team, and to us, they self-decided that they will always deliver early, which is great. It's a very proud moment. Matter of fact, I was talking to my boss nearby, one of them, and they were very proud to make sure that they could clarify that they always deliver early. So it's great. And we also set it up that the big reason why I wanted to deliver early is so they get to spend time with the tech partners talking about the work. And if the tech partners have an issue before the tech team starts, they can make some adjustments or figure it out. So it's been a great model for getting it done. On the flip side, if we're doing work that doesn't have a epic number next to it or isn't in Jira, sometimes it kind of drags along, and then you have a managing director saying, "Where is that?" And you realize it's been 6 months. I think delivery is when I think of delivery, it's the end step, but I think our partners are expecting deliveries at different phases in the project. And it's hard to keep that same level of importance that I said at the end of a project, sometimes in the middle of ones when nobody else is paying attention. So
are there any core setup elements that you would describe as, that typically lead to success in the communication across teams, or things in either scenario on the positive or the negative?
Right now, we have a new project that we've been kicking off, and we set it up that we define what we're going to do at the beginning of the week, and we have a midweek check-in, and we show it off at the end of the week. And it's been really successful. Not the most scalable, but been really successful for a small project. So actually, I'm hoping we're going to be exploring how to scale it up next year. That feels like something about the commitment of time seems like it keeps the focus. So.
And for everyone, is that just your design team in a design mindset, or is that sharing with other stakeholders as well too?
The nice thing is that is currently the design team, but we are also at the end of every week, it is the product partners and the quad are getting to see it. So that's where it could slow us down. Great line. You can go fast alone, or you can go to the right place together. Sadly, going to the right place together doesn't always mean speed. So we're trying to find the balance without losing the speed right now.
Let's take on through JJ. What about from your perspective? What has worked really well, and when have you seen design organizations really in a great motion within a product delivery life cycle, and maybe where have you seen some trip ups along the way?
Yeah. So, a couple of thoughts on that to build on what Mike was saying. Similar, we have a weekly review within the design team to see where things are at, connect the dots between projects so that if somebody's working on something that somebody else can benefit from, that connectivity is happening. And then there's reviews with the broader stakeholder group every sprint. And of course, the team is working together daily to to bring it to pass. And I think that, being there together, even virtually, like I've got teams in New York and India, and so they're not sitting together, but they've got times where they can be together and make sure that collaboration is really happening. When I think about how we get tripped up, one of the biggest things I see, and this is like, think about this from a place of empathy. The product team or the business team, they're on the hook to deliver something, and they've got stakeholders that are counting on that to happen. I think sometimes as designers, we forget that. And we feel like, oh, this problem, it's so meaty. I want time to solve this problem, but it may not be there. And so or like we scoped a problem a certain way, a challenge a certain way, and we've committed to delivering that. But along the way, I discovered this other way that's better. I really want to change course and do that thing. And so obviously communication on that is important, but the guiding principle I like to use is you deliver what you said you were going to deliver. And then if you want to go beyond that, great, bring in this other alternative that's even better, and, try and bring people along with that. But if where designers get caught is they just go after the thing that they want to do, and now they're late because it's not feasible. Technology comes back and says there's problems, and then it comes up the works.
Another call out to feasibility that I think Kathy raised earlier as well too. Kathy, let you weigh in here as well too, and just share some of your experiences.
Yeah, sure. I had a team once that was working on onboarding, and they had dozens and dozens of different account types that they needed to either, transform from an old platform or design from scratch from paper. And it was daunting, and they were starting to feel kind of beaten down by this lack of time. These forms had to get out, they had to get done. We were on the hook for them, and it was important to the company. And so what we did was we sat down with product and we kind of divided them between, these are the ones that need a little bit more thought. There are more users that go through them. There is more risk. And these are the ones that are the JDIs. And I can't take credit for the JDI. The team came up with that. But those are the just do it's. And just having that segmentation helped the design team feel better about the JDI, because they knew that there were other forms that they were going to get to work on, that were going to go through the research cycle and have a little bit more thought. And so it was a good compromise, and helped them get comfortable with some of those that just had to go through quickly.
Wonderful. Well, I'm going to go ahead and ask two more questions, and then we'll open it up to the audience so that folks can ask questions as well too. I want to make sure I missed that opportunity last time I hosted, so we won't make that mistake again. Well, let's shift gears a little bit and talk about what's inspiring you all right now as designers, and what are some of the sources that you get inspiration from. So I think maybe JJ, do we leave off with you?
Sure. Yeah, that's fine. People inspire me. New experiences inspire me. Can be simple things, interactions with my kids or grandkids, or, being in the outdoors and nature, that inspires me a lot. One thing that inspired me recently that I think about a lot. So I mentioned I have a team in India. I had a chance late last year to go visit them, and they're in Chennai, which is southeast India, right on the Indian Ocean. And just going to meet them, to understand their different perspectives, their cultures, how it informed who they are and what they bring to the work, was amazing. And while we were there, we had a chance to go out and visit UNESCO heritage site that was there, and they had so it was pretty amazing because it was one of our product managers who was also a history buff from the area, and he took us on a tour of this I can never remember the name of it, but this site where these temples were built like in 300 AD, and he took us on a product development journey as we walked through these multi-thousand-year-old temples, and literally like there was a king who had an idea that that his culture and was fading, and he wanted to make it permanent, and so they decided they were going to build their temples out of solid rock and like big granite structures that are carved out of a single piece of rock. And he showed us the prototypes they created to do this, these smaller versions to test it out and make sure it worked. And then the pièce de résistance is this massive 100-foot long, 40-foot tall carving. It was a bas relief with a temple carved into it out of this solid piece of granite. And it was like animals, and it's called the Descent of the Ganges, I think, if anybody wants to check it out. But things like that, in case you can't tell, really inspired me.
I'm going to be getting your colleague's name for a tour soon, I think.
So awesome.
JJ. Yeah. Kathy, what about you? What are your sources of inspiration right now?
Well, industry related, when I first thought about this question, I was like, gosh, I'm not really going after design inspiration lately. And that was, surprising to me. And when I thought about it, I'm a podcast junkie. And lately, I've been listening to a lot of design related podcasts, and I'm really inspired by the stories of just how people and organizations enact change and earn leadership without, necessarily having, top down direction for those changes. I think, sometimes these big companies feel like they are full of rules, but they really can be the Wild West, and individuals can make a lot of difference even within big companies. And so I love to hear those stories, how people have, enacted change in small ways.
Mike?
I'm similar to Joseph, though not the temple builder. That was really cool. Following people around, I always think about that UI UX picture where you have the sidewalk and then you have the grass path. But there's so many examples of that in the world. Like, we didn't invent UX, we just labeled it. It's been happening forever. People have been figuring out better ways to do stuff for a long time. So it's always interesting to find them. I think podcasts have been a place I've been finding inspiration lately. The one that comes to mind is revisionist history, actually. Something about having to break down why we do stuff or how it happened always seems interesting. So those are the types of things I'm interested in.
Not to put anyone on the spot, are there any brands, and we'll just say outside of FS, that you see and you get excited by when you see they have a new product or experience or anything that you use personally? And no answer is fine.
So for me, I have a lot of love for the outdoors and a lot of the outdoor brands. Patagonia is the big one that everybody mentions, but look cool. I'm wearing a cool sweater, and like the way they approach not just the clothing side, but like the gear side and the personality of the brands. They seem very authentic. Authenticity is important to me. I think sometimes in this age of where everything is about the highest, the slickest technology and the newest things, sometimes authenticity may suffer a little bit. And so seeing that is very inspiring.
Yeah, and I can, as an outdoor enthusiast myself, it's amazing, both the practicality of gear and then, other elements as well.
I got to go opposite of the outdoors and into the indoors with Peloton. I love it. I love their interface. They've done a lot over the years to improve the experience and make it easier for you to, plan your workouts and track them. So, yeah, Peloton.
It's a fun one. Mike, anything?
I can't think of anything digital. I actually was going to say there's been a lot of local chains that have been coming into Charlotte, and like I was just down in Ballantyne near the Bowl recently, and like every one of those is local or regional chains, and they've really thought through how their stores are structured and like what their model is and whatnot. So it's really interesting to talk to them and figure out how they came up with their models. So
Nice. I like three very different answers. That's perfect. Yeah. So last question for me, and then we'll open it up. I did want to give some time to talk about what do we think the future of design looks like, and pick any horizon you want, whether it's 10 years or further out. But, Kathy, let's start with you. Where do you think design is heading? How do you think that's going to transform how design is done and its role in companies?
Well, AI is, a natural, thing to think of with the future. And right now it's tough in financial services because at least we're not, generating content that's client facing, but there's so much opportunity for AI to help us do our jobs and, take some of the labor out of our jobs so that we can spend more time on the creative part. So I think short term, I'm really looking forward to how I can utilize AI more in my own practice.
Mike, anything you add to that?
AI, of course, but like a little bit nearer term, I've been noticing. I'm sure everybody's noticed, like the word double diamond is not allowed to be used in corporations anymore. I had an agency that doesn't do design say they're going to do design thing. I feel like all of our terms are stolen. So I've actually been wondering if we need to. Our next step will be like simplicity. Like we don't use discovery. We say like, can we help you answer questions? Like just to become more. I don't want to call it simplified, but I was joking with my team about a game my family played that's talk like a caveman, where you can only use single syllable words, or you get hit with a rubber bat, inflatable bat, not rubber. But similar thing, like can we avoid using our terminology in the future so that it can feel more inclusive versus creating terminology that either gets stolen or makes us feel exclusive. So
Interesting. I like that one, Mike. JJ, where do you think design is going from here, and what excites you or scares you or gets covered?
Yeah. So first thing I would say, there is a future, and I think the future is bright. Like right now, we're in a very interesting place, and a lot of what I see in like social media, LinkedIn, different things, is very like pessimistic, and there's a lot of like, oh, it's the end of UX or whatever, a lot of clickbait, but some people who are saying that, and I would say that's not, like Mike was saying, we've been trying to solve these problems forever. These problems are not going away. We will have different tools, but we'll still need people to solve the problems. And something that I've held to, because I've been in UX since the beginning, and I've seen it go through cycles, and I've seen ups and downs. And when the downs happen, like 2 years ago, I couldn't hire a designer. They were too expensive because, the market was just like, building. And then the bubble burst and it went down, and now it's course correcting. But I remember, so beginning in my career, I'll tell a story and then I'll be quiet. So I started in graphic design when I finally got my head on straight. And at this time, Adobe was king. And so everything was about the Adobe tools. And I was working in a marketing team. We were creating like trade show booths. And I needed help like mounting different things on foam core, if you really want to go way back, to create the booths. And I had a guy who, that was his job. He owned a shop, and you'd send him your files and he would get them all mounted nice and pretty for you and put it out there. And after I got to know him, what I learned was he used to be a graphic designer, and he didn't make the transition to the Adobe tools when it was time to make that transition. And so he found himself locked out. And so I think where we are now is AI is the new tool, and so, for anybody who is concerned or fearing or coming up, like learn about AI, learn about, the large language models and how it can be used as a tool so that you adapt and change. And, so I think the future is bright, but I don't think it looks like it does today. I think it's going to be very different.